Sekeres Price for Tuesday, June 18th, 2024, coming to you from the Nation Network studio built by Arbor Lee here at the iconic Wall Center, downtown Vancouver. If you're looking for your next meeting space, contact the Wall for all your event needs. Sales at wallcenter.com. Matt Sekeres alongside Blake Price, Grady Sass hitting switches, conducting things. Big show coming up, and it's all brought to you by Applewood Auto Group.
Applewood Infinity at the Richmond Auto Mall's got the 2024 Q50s with lease rates from 0%. That's the best number for lease rates. Plus non-stack cash to $4,000 in select trims as well. Check it out. Give them a call. Applewood Infinity in Richmond. It's all good at Applewood.
Poll question today. We are asking you, if they leave in free agency, were the trades for Elias Lindholm and Nikita Zadorov worth it? Yes or no? You can vote at Sekeres Price on our Twitter or X and YouTube accounts. I voted yes, and I voted yes because these were two of the top playoff performers for the Vancouver Canucks. They took the team and the fan base on a fun run into Game 7 of the second round of the Stanley Cup playoffs, and because I think they demonstrated to their teammates what it takes to win in the Stanley Cup playoffs. I sort of feel about this past season. Do you remember all those years ago when Alex Anthopoulos went on his massive trading spree with the Toronto Blue Jays, adding Tulowitzki and David Price and all those huge names? And the idea was, look, if this doesn't win us a championship, so be it, but it's been so long since we've out of the postseason, we've got to give our fans something. The same really applied to the Vancouver Canucks this past year. Yeah, there was the bubble run, but that was an entirely different animal in terms of procedure and really enjoyment as well. So, beyond that, it had been 2015 since the Canucks had been in the playoffs, and this was a team that's showing signs. And so I thought it was worth it. Now you're going to miss that first round pick. You may miss Hunter Brzustewicz as well. But I think all in all, even if they do wind up with new clubs here, and of course we think we're near decision day here with Zadorov, then I still think it was a nothing ventured, nothing gained sort of proposition, and worth it given the enjoyment we had in this season, and particularly those two rounds of the playoffs.
We talked about it while it was all happening. I saw this city. I saw my own household in a very different place than we have ever seen before. From a business ops standpoint, it was absolutely worth it for the Vancouver Canucks. They would have zero regrets about it. From a hockey ops perspective, probably still worth it for the learnings of going as deep as they did. Truth of the matter is, you just don't know, because as much as Lindholm and Zadorov made big contributions come playoff time, you just have no idea. Without those guys, they would have maybe made different deals. Are we suggesting that if they didn't make those deals, they wouldn't have made any deals and they would have just gone in with the group that they had in November? Who knows what the next universe over looks like without those particular deals. But as it stands, I don't think this was a Stanley Cup winning team. I think it would have been a bit of a piece of thievery for the Canucks to end up as they did in the conference final. It was that close, but I think that would have been a massive swindle job to get them into the conference final, given where they are right now in their, in their evolution. So I don't think you can have a ton of regret. Yeah, there's a price to be paid, but I think they've still got some room to move here. They've got enough salary cap space that, while I don't know that I'm predicting 109 points, I'll take the under on next season without even knowing who they got. But I'll take the under, but I'm not going to take it by much.
Let's get on to our top story then. Frank Saravelli, the Vancouver Canucks intend to make a strong play for Jake Guentzel, seeking that elusive winger to play with Elias Pettersson. Top story presentation of Douglas, and Frank lists Filip Hronek, Zadorov, and Myers, and saying the Canucks are trying to make the money work around those four: Guentzel, Hronek, Zadorov, Myers. Interesting, he lists Dakota Joshua, Elias Lindholm, and Ilya Mikheyev among those who aren't likely to be back. Now, we know Lindholm's a free agent that is likely going to get better opportunity elsewhere. It sounds very much like Dakota Joshua has more money available to him with other clubs after a career season, a breakout season. And of course, in Mikheyev's case, you're looking to find a taker for the contract and it could still mean retaining some salary or costing you an asset, but the Canucks seem poised to try and get that done. The deal is expected to be worth in excess for Guentzel of $65 million. Of course, the Carolina Hurricanes can offer him an 8-year contract. Everybody else can offer him a 7-year contract. So if you do the math, 7 years for the Vancouver Canucks, total value $65 million or north, you're looking at $9.2, $9.3 million per season.
Yeah, it's a lot of coin. I can be honest. I've seen Jake Guentzel play. Have I seen him play 100 games? Nope. So I'm going to rely on the opinions of a lot of people that have, and canvassing that group of people, or reading, listening. Man, people love him. People think he's a difference maker. I don't think he's going to make those differences over the 7-year contract, but he might be able to make them over the first 4, certainly. And those are the key years for the Vancouver Canucks in their particular playing cycle right now with this core. So, there's the real potential for that offense to be ready, full, fleshed out in the top 6. And after years of trying to figure out what to do with Elias Pettersson and whether or not to keep him with JT Miller or break him off and have his own line, I think you could finally see that top 6 at a place where you say, okay, that's a contending top 6. Now, then the debate will turn to the bottom 6 and its viability.
Very good, Blake. You're foreshadowing welcome at here.
But at the same time, if they're able to hold on to much of you're never going to have a perfect team, folks, particularly this early in your cycle. So to rob from the bottom 6 to fluff up the top 6, I'm okay with that particular move. I think this management group has shown they can get creative in the bottom 6 and find some jewels in the rough here. And I think the defense is going to shape up just fine. It'll be as good as it was last year.
Guentzel ranks 14th in goals over the last 6 seasons. And he's the only player high on that list that has played fewer than 400 games to get to those 198 goals. He's 20th in points per game over the last 6 years. He's 27th.
That's amongst all players, or that's amongst wingers?
Over the last 6 seasons, Guentzel amongst all players.
All players.
Wow. Yeah. Or would you be sweating $9 million plus per year on a 7-year deal for a guy who will be 30 before he plays his first Canucks game?
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I that's a benefit for going for the tier 2 guy that might be a little bit younger, might have a few more years. That's the benefit of going for a trade where you might get younger, have him for a few more years. It's a concern, but it's a pushing the chips into the middle play for the next 3 to 4 years and saying this is the time to strike.
Mm-hmm. You want to do welcome Matt here then? Or
let's do it. Let's hear what you have to say about it.
Let's do Douglas.
All right. Well, welcome Matt. You know what? I did not sleep well last night because I wasn't on my Douglas mattress. And
did you get thrown out of bed again?
It's the first thing I thought about. No, long story, pets and a whole mess. I was not on my Douglas mattress last night, and I'm going to make sure that I am tonight because, folks, if you haven't had the pleasure of sleeping on a Douglas mattress, well, give yourself that pleasure because you have 365 nights of trial at your disposal. No questions asked, full refund. Just go to douglas.ca/Canucks Army. Order yours today. You also get the Comfort Sleep Bundle. That's 2 pillows with protectors, cotton sheet set, and a mattress protector free with any of your orders. douglas.ca/Canucks Army.
Pets. Translation, the dog kicked Blake out of bed last night. Mrs. Price was like, you get out of here. I'll just sleep with the dog.
Dogs.
Oh, plural. Yeah. They both get to sleep in the bed, do they?
They're nicer than me.
Lucky dogs on that Douglas mattress. Let's get to the welcome mat presentation, Northlands Golf Course.
Let's get into it. I don't know if it was malicious. Probably not. But I do know it was another WTF moment. My question to ownership would be, was it worth it? And the architect, and I use that term loosely, given there wasn't much architecture, more finger painting with this team. It's like the running of the bulls in Pamplona. You know someone is going to get hurt.
That's what you all need to understand here, right now.
So they're going to take a big run at Guentzel, and of course, if they secure him, they'll have one of the plum talents that is on the marketplace this July. They could also be weakening their team. They'll have added a championship element, but at the cost of a championship roster, at least for this coming season. Because signing Guentzel at more than $9 million means there's only so much money and cap space left to fill the other holes on this roster. And look, totally get it would procure Elias Pettersson, that scoring winger he so desperately needs, but that would be at the cost of depth, as Blake just outlined. Now, Saravelli says they're trying to fit Guentzel, Roenick, Zadorov, and Myers into the salary cap for next season. And of course, that means parting with Lindholm, Joshua, and finding a taker for Mikheyev's contract. On the surface, bringing back 5/6 of the 5 of the 6 defensemen, everyone minus Ian Cole, while adding Guentzel, that looks like a win. But when you look at what that would do to the bottom 6, it likely makes Pius Suter the third-line center. Okay, fair enough. Likely makes Nils Åman the fourth-line center. You'll need a big summer. It also so saps the salary cap space that the bottom 6 wingers are a combination of Phil DiGiuseppe, Vasily Podkolzin, Arshdeep Bains, Linus Karlsson. Now, perhaps there's enough cap space left over to add a minimum salaried reinforcement or two to that group. Canucks have done a superb job with pro scouting and finding players on the margins, so they would need to produce there again. But the team would lack depth at center ice and on the wing, and they'd get away from that strong top 9 group that, for me, defined Rick Tocchet hockey in the first half of last season, when the Canucks' third line of Blueger, Garland, Joshua had success matching up against other teams' depth players. Now, you might look to the farm, but let's face it, Podkolzin, Bains, Karlsson, if they're able to hang as every night NHL regulars, that's a massive win. More likely, 1 or 2 of those guys aren't going to cut it, and that further depletes Tocchet's options. Guys like Max Sasson, Atu Ratu are no more than hope bets at the moment. Now, depth may not be a concern if you're at full health. And let's remember, the Canucks got nearly perfect health from their top 7 scorers last season. They missed 5 games combined. What are the chances that's going to happen again? Look, I wholeheartedly agree that finding a winger for Pettersson and having that finishing punch off the flank that was so missing against Edmonton is supremely important come next postseason. But you got to get there first. And it's a long 82-game road when your organization has razor-thin depth. That's Welcome Matt for today. Invite your feedback. Feedback channels as follows on email live at sekeresandprice.com. Can text 778-402-9680. The Great Clips text message inbox. Twitter at Matt Sekeres, at Sekeres and Price. Northlands Golf Course, 6 to 90-day reservations. You can book your tee time. Just slot. If you're single, you just slot yourself in on existing twosomes or threesomes. If you are looking to book 6 to 90 days out, there's a $10 per player booking fee, limited daily availability. Check it all out. golfnorthlands.com. So, getting back to the discussion, would you be comfortable with that collection of Podkolzin, DiGiuseppe, Bains, Karlsson forming your bottom 6 wingers? Would you be comfortable with Suter and Åman nailing down the 3rd and 4th line center roles?
Well, I think there's still going to be some pocket change lying around for another edition of $1 million, of $1.5 million.
I agree.
Add somebody else to that mix.
Chances, though, that they continue to unearth like players who helped you to the degree of Blueger in the first half, Joshua over the course of the season, or at least the 60 games he played. I think that puts a lot of stress on pro scouting. You're going to have more misses than hits there, right?
Generally, yeah, and they were almost all hits this season, at least for the first half of the year. Again, we have to put in that caveat because all those guys eventually did turn into what we thought they were by the end of the season. And in fact, not a lot of contribution from that group at all come playoff time. So they were great stories for a bit. And so by the time the 82 game schedule is wrapped up, when you look at their numbers in totality, how many of them are still way above what you could expect from them? Not really. They were kind of on par with their career averages. So do I think that ultimately the Vancouver Canucks can get the same production out of who they ice on the wings and the bottom six? Yeah, I think they can. They're not going to get what they got in the fall, But after 82 games, yeah, I think they can.
I would just be worried, Blake, like if you get a combination of like a JT Miller and a Brock Besser injury next year, where they miss 20 plus games apiece.
Yeah, they didn't have that.
And you're top heavy. Boy, to me, that becomes a can you even make the playoffs scenario. Like, to me, that's job one. The more and more I think about this offseason for the Canucks, the more and more I'm resigning myself to believing next year may be a step back. It's about positioning the club for 25-26. If you add Guentzel now, as I mentioned, and welcome Matt, you have that championship element. I just wonder if that's more cart before the horse, if you're better off building up around that. And I've long argued, go get a $6 and a $3 million winger and continue to have a strong top nine. I just wonder if you get the Guentzel piece sorted, you still backlog more work to be done next summer. I would sort of be more inclined to build up, make sure you have a strong depth team, and then take another crack at a top line winger at next year's trade deadline. And if you don't make it, then you got another crack in the summer.
Injuries are a force to be reckoned with for any team. You take Draisaitl and Nuge away from the Oilers, they're going to struggle as well, right? So if that happens for the Canucks and 2 top 6 wingers are out,
forwards,
whatever, I think they'll tumble for sure. But I think what you could see, depending on the length of the absences, right now, I think there's every reason to believe the Canucks can compete for second in the division.
Yeah,
that they might be having to settle for a wild card spot if they get injuries, but you hope that they get healthy by the time the playoffs roll around, and you also hope that maybe if let's say Brock Besser is gone for 6 weeks in the middle of the season, maybe that's past Christmas time. Maybe that's the time for Jonathan Lekramaki to be dropped into
the other
and a time
element,
for the rookie to drop in and show what he can do. Maybe it means Podkolzin's had 7 goals before Christmas and all of a sudden gets elevated to a top 6 role and starts to flourish there. I mean, there's all sorts of different plot lines that can happen in the midst of disaster.
Yeah, believe it when I see it with Vasily. But you hit on something there with Lekramaki. You probably can't count on him to be a NHL contributor this coming season. You probably should be able to 2 years from now. So that gets you that winger you're looking for, in particular because, there's a chance for a real mistake on Guentzel. Like if the wheels fall off and Father Time wins the battle early, boy, that's a difficult contract. So before I go out and make a huge contractual commitment to a 30-year-old like that, where I'm going to be paying him to age 37, I would look at a different mousetrap.
But they're multiple wingers short, though. Multiple.
No, I understand, which is why I'm for go get a $6 million winger and a $3 million winger. Let Lekramaki marinate. Go add, if you can, the top line winger at the trade deadline or next summer, and go at it that way as opposed to creating a top heavy team. And for me, that gets away a little from Rick Tocchet hockey, does it not?
Depends on the Jake Guentzel doesn't shy away from board battles.
No.
He the process is.
But what I'm
easy
saying is, if
Guentzel.
Tocchet and Yogi and the coaching staff, like if they're not feeling good about running a third line out there, to me something's lost there. To me, you're in a situation where you're leaning on that top 6 even more than you did this year.
But Matt, you think about the second half of this year when that Pettersson line got thrown over the boards.
Right?
Did anyone have confidence that great things were about to happen? I didn't.
Nope.
So that's the same thing as throwing a lackluster third line over the board. Like you just thought Pettersson was out there with nobody to help him, and you just didn't expect anything.
And I guess for me, part of the equation too is I'm of the belief if you're going to pay a centerman $11.6 million and he's got the skill set of Elias Pettersson, he needs to make others better in larger measure than he did this past year. You could argue Höglander, and that's a good shout. Now, Höglander wasn't there all season. He had to basically earn his way there. And frankly, the results weren't as great as you would have hoped. But, for me, that's part of the equation here that, okay, you're going to be paid like one of the top players in the National Hockey League. That's, to me, it's not incumbent just for you to be great and he was far from it in the second half and the postseason, but to make other players better as well.
I mean, we
for
saw him, and we know he was not in real Elias Pettersson form. So we know that you're right to a large degree. There is a point in which you're not going to extract any more out of player X because that's just what player X is. In the short term, player X can shine. I mean, we saw Sam Lafferty score a boatload of goals by the end of November. But I mean, that's the short term. I mean, eventually Sam Lafferty was not an Elias Pettersson winger, right? Like, so there is a point of no return there where, you know, the winger is just out of their depth. So it would be nice to see some concentration of that, and, you know, bringing in a $4 million winger are you that much further ahead? Can Elias Pettersson turn that $4 million winger into a 20 goal scorer? Yeah, probably. But is that still what you want alongside your $11.5 million player?
The way I would construct it is, can Elias Pettersson turn a $6 million winger into a 30, 35, maybe even 40 goal scorer? You know, whether that's a guy like Teravainen, whether that's a guy like DeBrusk or something like that. But hey, good debate. We'll have it more, and particularly if the Canucks are able to land Guentzel, I suspect they will have an answer one way or another beforehand from Nikita Zadorov.
Teravainen, for that matter, is 30 in training camp too, right? So same age as Guentzel.
Yeah, but I don't think you're going 7 years on the deal, right? Like, you're getting out of that guy before 35.
You're going 6 probably. I
No.
mean, he can get Teravainen's going to be able to get 6 years out of somebody for sure.
AFP had that as 4 by 5.2.
Oh, that's a steal of a deal. That's a steal of a deal. I'd be surprised if he signs.
Anyways, so let's say it's 5. I'd prefer a contract like that, knowing I still have some left over to add another winger. Or, you know, as I was just going to say, Blake, like if Zadorov leaves, then that money might have to be earmarked for a defenseman.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, if Zadorov leaves, you need to sign somebody significant defensively. I don't mean a $6 million player, but
well, if Zadorov leaves, then I'm very much inclined to what you've been talking about is, do you need to add a top 4 right side guy? Bump Myers down.
Yes.
And then get by with what you can, third pair left side with Jolson in reserve, particularly on the right side. Anyways, there's going to be all sorts of different jigsaw puzzle combinations here coming up. That's part of the fun of the Vancouver Canucks offseason. And folks, as we've been telling you, if it seems like a short run wait, well, it is after you get to Game 7, the second round of the Stanley Cup playoffs, particularly when the playoffs are backed up.
We're inside 2 weeks.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to get some of these answers next week, potentially, with the NHL draft. And then, of course, that's a big milestone, milepost for the Canucks with regards to the Philip Hronek contract matter and whether or not you can get him on a long-term deal as opposed to going to arbitration or maybe even consummating a trade. Head coach Rick Tocchet did a Chirp podcast, and well, he talked a little bit about reinventing himself, and particularly with what he mentioned. Well, one of the things that he mentioned that he would go into the summer thinking about, and that is how to be a better team off the rush. As we talked about over the course of the season, the Vancouver Canucks, while converting an obscene amount of their rush chances, actually were generating the fewest in the National Hockey League. They did not play with particular pace. They were more a chip and chase team than they were a carry the puck over the blue line with control and see if you can make something happen. Here's the quote from Tocchet, and I'd like your take on it. I give our coaches a project to look at the top 3 rush teams and see what they're doing that we can learn from without sacrificing our defensive game. That's what I mean by reinventing ourselves. Good coaches take a deep dive to figure out what can be improved. And much like just about everything out of Rick Tocchet's mouth, I find myself nodding in agreement, and he's absolutely right. I mean, this is the essence of the profession and professional development, right? Like, what did we do poorly? What do we need to improve upon? What was my culpability in that? And how am I going to go about fixing it with the big whistle in terms of what we do structurally, systematically, how we communicate it to the group, how we practice it, and so on and so on and so on. But I found myself listening to that and reading that and also thinking, boy, I hope he doesn't want to reinvent himself too much. Like, that was a Mona Lisa of a coaching job last year, Rick. Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater here, because you got absolutely everything out of the Vancouver Canucks next year.
Right.
And I would hate to throw that away because we're chasing one narrow facet of the game, which really last year didn't necessarily hurt until the Stanley Cup playoffs.
But he's not saying he's reversing course. I think what he's saying is, more than half the team is going to be the same group of guys. He can't give the same speeches.
Well,
he's got to evolve. He's got to coach the next level of the evolution to the core group of guys. He'll double back, and I'm sure he'll give Cole's notes to the newcomers on what he taught this year. But ultimately, they have to develop.
Every coach is going to have a different theme for the season. But if I can use another talking term, your non-negotiables are your non-negotiables. Yeah. That's something you're going to be messaging day after day, week after week, year after year.
Well, I think he's going to hope, Matt, that he doesn't have to hammer those anymore. He's going to hope that for the guys that were here last year, that's just embedded in them now. They know that.
Fair. The frequency should diminish. Yeah. The message itself should stay the same. But I continue to be so impressed with Tocchet and how introspective he is. Reminds me of, Wally Bono way back in the day, where when something would go wrong with the Lions or the Stampeders, Wally would look in the mirror first and go, okay, this didn't work. How did I screw it up? And work from there, as opposed to blame others. And it wasn't me. Wasn't how we coached it. Wasn't how we messaged it. No. Rick's taken a deep dive, and I think he'll come back the better coach.
Well, I mean,
hope he doesn't forget his non-negotiables.
Let's reflect. He's 15 months into his return to this job in the National Hockey League after a fair amount of time away. He's probably, and really, again, that second half of his first season, I mean, he's literally just getting his feet wet again. Mm-hmm. The full development of a head coach was this season. He's going to have some learnings. He's going to have some, and not like 180 turns on what he thought on a certain subject. But again, there might be a 45-degree turn on a certain topic that he thinks, I got that kind of wrong. I'm gonna tweak it. So we'll see his evolution.
I was disappointed to read this yesterday from Patrick Johnson of the Province and Post Media. Loring Finney has resigned as Canucks Sports Entertainment's Vice President of Communications. Mm-hmm. He had only been in that post since September. Blake and I know Loring a little bit, worked with him at Bell. He was a big reason why Bell was the title sponsor for the Whitecaps when they moved into
big MLS soccer fan
play. Yeah, so a good sportsman, somebody who understands the media business. I had high hopes for him in that post. I thought it was a needed post for the club and an inspired choice.
A lot of experience. They got a lot of experience there in that role.
Because that was one of the things that had been missing since Chris Brumwell, and even prior to that, TC Carling had left Canucks Sports Entertainment. This is an organization that still has trouble retaining good people on the business side. The hockey operations have improved, but there is still a fair bit of work to do on the business side to get it back up to the level that it was at during the Gillis era, when you had first Chris Zimmerman and then Victor Debonis presiding over the business side of the operation. The other thing is, and perhaps this is me being too influenced by all the political reporting that I've been around over the years, but when you lose a senior comms person in other walks of life, politics, business, the questions become, okay, is there something coming down the pipe here that this person doesn't want to be a party to, or that this person had a communication or even crisis management strategy that wasn't being listened to? It's a difficult workplace, Canucks Sports and Entertainment. There's a lot of people there who desperately want to work in the National Hockey League. Upper management and ownership knows it. They grind people because of it. I was hoping that Loring would have a greater effect on the Canucks in the way they go about communicating with their greater public at large. and those of us in the media, and I was sorry to see him leave.
Yeah, it's too bad.
They've gone backwards in a lot of respects.
The job site is a busy one for the
Mhm.
Vancouver Canucks. There's
Yeah,
a lot of
the
listings.
job
often.
postings for Canucks
Yeah.
Sports Entertainment, there seems to be tons.
Yeah.
And you know, Blake and I have been at this a long time now, and the number of people who we see go into that operation and then quickly eject more often than not on their own volition after looking around and going, okay, this isn't what I made it out to be. We'll see if there's any effect going forward here, and particularly if any of that bleeds into the hockey operations side. I saw our friend Harmon Dial and his tag team partner on The Athletic, Thomas Drance, did a piece on Speedy Guys, the Canucks and Patrik Laine, the general manager, with an express desire to add speed in the offseason. And of course, some of these guys that we're about to talk about would only be the case if we're looking at sizable salary cap space, i.e., not getting a combination of Guentzel, Zadorov, Roenick.
Some of them, there's some cheap ones there too.
Others are, on the margins, roster guys.
Including one guy who's supposed to draw into the lineup tonight, and Ryan Lomberg of the Florida Panthers.
Right.
So if you want to take one name off the list and actually go and scout him today as a Vancouver Canucks shopper, he's apparently going to draw into game number 5 here for the Panthers.
Right. Now, has he played well enough? Has he had a good enough year that he's going to sort of get some of that Stanley Cup
I don't
free
think so.
agent money? No, he's not that level of play. 29 years old. A pure winger there.
Last year was his big year. 12 goals last year. He had 5 this year. No points.
How's he done in the playoffs?
Nothing. 0s in 5 games so far.
So
he's not going to be expensive. Not going to be expensive.
Right. The bigger fish there are on the forward side, Chandler Stevenson of the Vegas Golden Knights, and on the defense side, Sean Walker. Let's deal with Stevenson for a moment. Alvina's mentioned the structure of 3 centers and how much he likes it so often. I do wonder, particularly if they don't make hay on Guentzel, could you see them taking a run there? I mean, after Elias Lindholm, you could argue he's the best free agent centerman available, Blake. AFP has him coming in at 5 years at about $5.6 million, a 30-year-old who had 51 points and 16 goals last year for Vegas.
We've talked about him a lot. He's not a household name for a lot of people, right? So he kind of sneaks up on you with his accomplishments of the last few years.
Has had to play up the lineup at center in Vegas before they added Eichel and really fortified their team. But
when Eichel was recovering, he was the top line center for a bit.
I mean, he'd be an amazing third line center. I mean, he'd probably be the best third line center in the league. And I do sort of wonder whether he looks at it like Lindholm too, is like, well, I could go to Vancouver and play third line minutes, or I could go to just about every other team, or certainly amongst the suitors, have his pick of teams where he would slot in as a number 2 center. That's my sense of it, at least.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how it's sold to him as well. I mean, if it's sold to him that you get Connor Garland as your winger for sure, we're gonna have, so and so with Pettersson, we're gonna have Connor Garland. I mean, as long as you've got a winger, let's say the Canucks brought back Lindholm, and they're probably not going to, or get a guy like Stevenson. Like, you're the third line by a necessary label, but how much of a third line are you by minutes? Like, it'll be by one shift that you would be a third line center, because you're going to get a lot of the special teams that the other guys are getting as well. And you're going to be throwing out there a lot. Team's not investing $6 million a year into a player and putting him out for 12 minutes. Like, the guy's going to play 17 minutes
for sure.
While Pettersson plays 18,
but do you play power play 1? That's sort of, there are a number of considerations there with that level of player who understands that his lot in life might be better on a weaker team, that his personal role might be a little diminished on a better team.
Those are the pros and cons that every free agent goes over. Absolutely.
Sean Walker was a 31-point defenseman this past year with the Flyers and the Avalanche, 10 goals in 81 games. Plays the right side. Now, isn't really the big, burly, tough, space-eating defenseman, 5'11", 180. So you wonder if that jives with Tocchet hockey. By the same token, it would certainly increase the speed level on the blue line. The other guy I wanted to ask you about is your boy Kapanen. Blake has long loved Kasperi Kapanen, and of course, there's a lot of history there with Rutherford, Alvin, and Tocchet. He was the first round pick for Rutherford way back when. Made his way to Toronto, was reacquired by the Pittsburgh Penguins. Now, he's had some rough goes.
Oh, boy, has he ever.
But, boy, you watch him. He's a magnificent skater. All sorts of speed. And not in the small body either. Right? Like, he's got some size to him.
I wish his penalty kill prowess had developed. He's not exactly a go-to penalty killer much anymore. He has lost all, like, are you just signing yourself up for Ilya Mikheyev 2.0? Mm-hmm. And so you'd have to tell me the price on that. But if you're getting Kasperi Kapanen at dirt price rates, sure, I'd take a chance on him. But it has to be a show me contract of extreme value.
Well, I'm for, is it 1.15 million or thereabouts, being the salary that you could wholly bury in the minors. As I say every offseason, I'm for every contract signed at that rate or below.
If you're telling me Kasperi Kapanen 1.2, exactly. I'm signing it. Sure.
Right. 22 points and 73 goals this past season with the St. Louis Blues. The other names that
he did have 15 goals last year. It's not bad, like
split between Pittsburgh and St. Louis. Yeah, in 66 games.
So he was
a half point per game the previous year.
Yeah, and that was a string of 5 straight seasons where he was double digit goals every year and between 30 and 45 points. So you don't have to go that far back to see him at his better self. And he's 28 in training camp.
Keither Sherwood is a player we've discussed before with the Nashville Predators. Ben Myers is one time was a coveted college free agent coming out, signed with the Anaheim Ducks. Hasn't necessarily
not much there,
worked out there. He can play the middle though. Sadly, I believe he's a left shot, but you'd be banking on him being more of a late bloomer. He's 25 already. And then Oliver Shillington and Hayden Fleury on defense, which again, if some combination of, or one of Hronek, Zadorov, or Myers isn't coming back, then I think we'll look a little more deeply on the defense side of things.
Yes.
But right now, if Saravelli is to be believed, and the gambit is to get Guentzel alongside Hronek, Zadorov, Myers, that those are your 4 priorities, so be it. We're going to move that way until something happens there that makes it unattainable, unachievable. Did you know that Jason Tatum, forward with the Boston Celtics, or wing with the Boston Celtics, and Matthew Tkachuk are like childhood buddies?
Yeah, there's pictures of them as they were like 12 years old. Yeah,
they both went to Chaminade Prep, which is a big prep school, and in fact has a pretty good athletic history in the St. Louis area. Many will remember Keith Tkachuk, Matthew Tkachuk's father, who played a good part of his career after leaving your Winnipeg Jets, sadly, Blake, the St. Louis Blues. But it's a pretty good sports school. Bradley Beal, the NBA guard, who's been a darn good player, played there. Ben Bishop, the NHL goaltender.
I think there's a picture of the 4 of them as kids.
Yeah,
there's a famous picture of the 4 of them. Of 4 kids, and 2 of them are Tatum and Tkachuk.
Paul Stastny went to school there at one point. And then a bunch of Brady Tkachuk played there as well. And then a bunch of sort of fringe NHL guys who played a little bit in the NHL. Chris Butler, the defenseman, once upon a time for the St. Louis Blues, played there. Chris Weideman, the defenseman, played there a little bit. In fact, St. Louis prep hockey is pretty good. It punches above its weight class. There's been a lot of Blues that have settled in the area over the years and have lent their expertise in the game of hockey. And some of those kids have gone on to forge professional careers. So anyways, Tatum, after winning the NBA championship, the Larry O'Brien Trophy last night, has shouted out to Tkachuk saying, your turn, go get the Stanley Cup tonight.
Yes.
In Florida. And speaking of the Stanley Cup Final, do you have hope for the Oilers that they keep the ball rolling after that offensive explosion in Game 4 and can get this one? Because if they get this one, then suddenly we have an interesting series here.
See,
with it going back to Edmonton.
That's it. Like, this is the big doubtful one, right? Like, I don't like their chances. Florida at home. I mean, Dallas did pretty well in game number 4 themselves to keep themselves alive, and then they just get waxed in game number 5. So I could see the exact same plot line playing out where Florida just says, yeah, we were.
You're talking the Mavericks, not the Celtics.
Mavericks. Mavericks did well in game 4 to keep it alive and then just get waxed again in game number 5. So I could see all that playing out here, with the Oilers having their sort of their moment, but then just being outclassed in game number 5. But if they prove me wrong in game number 5 here, then all of a sudden they start to steal serve back a little bit, while not in actuality.
And their building it'd be raucous for game 6. Their building would be extraordinary for game 6 if they do happen to get it back to Edmonton.
But as all sports will tell you, come playoff time, no momentum carrying forward. I wouldn't be surprised in the least if Florida
I agree,
comes back with a victory here. So
I'd say sometimes there's momentum. Sometimes you get a team on the back foot and they just can't recover. I'm not sure this is the spot.
Not yet.
And on the Stanley Cup Final, interesting column, provocative column from Cathal Kelly of the Globe and Mail on the weekend. I don't always love his work, but this one I'm intrigued. Let me just read from it. Our game, ? Yes, we're still best at hockey, but we don't care the way we used to. There were 2 polls done prior to the Stanley Cup Final, one in Canada, one in America. In America, respondents, 28% said they took a passing interest in hockey and the Cup Final. As Kelly notes, 28% of the American population is like 80 million people. And they're doing like 3 million on the national carrier.
It's a weird poll. I don't believe
the Leger poll in Canada asks you, are you paying much or any attention to the Cup Final? 58% said they weren't. He goes on to argue that in Canada now, we are decamped into our tribes. Canucks, Oilers, Flames, Leafs, Senators, what have you. And writes, no one has to love either of the teams involved. But if a plurality of Canadians can't even be bothered to tell a fib and say they have a passing interest in the Cup Final, that's worse than bad news. That means whatever nostalgic hold the game had on our national imagination is in the midst of being let go.
Let me ask you this, though. Like, let's flip this on its ear. Talk about a different sport. If you ask Canadian respondents if they had a passing interest in Canada at the Men's World Cup, I think a lot of them would say yes, because, it just seems like the nice thing to do. They know that it's a bit of a story there. But do they actually believe it in their hearts?
Well,
meanwhile, you go to a soccer nation and you ask them something similar about a third party team, they'd be like, no, like, we know
because they're
what.
So hardcore.
Yes, we know what's what.
There's a piece in the column. Again, tell me what you think. There's a consensus that removing violence improved the quality of the game, but it left hockey without an identity. What is hockey to us now? The ratings would suggest that it has become a purely local concern. If your team is in it, great. If not, on to the next. Has hockey lost some of its identity and thus its pull because the game isn't as violent as it used to be?
No, I refuse to believe that people have even distinguished that it's lost its violence. I don't think people have noticed. There's enough violent stories throughout the year. Matt Rempe, you get your fights still.
But that we know Rempe.
Yeah. What do you mean?
Does that not say something? I got to say, when Rempe debuted for the New York Rangers, there must have been 3 or 4 people that week that asked what I thought of him and what I thought of, forget the incident and who the opposing team was. And that's still a conversation starter, I would argue, in Canadian barstools, as much as did you see that great goal McDavid scored or anything like that.
Well, for Canadians might like the bloodthirst. It might discern the lack of bloodthirst a little bit more. I don't think American fans have picked up on it.
I thought that's what Americans wanted in their hockey for all those years.
No, I think you're right. But I still think they attribute hockey as being the bare knuckle violent game. I don't think they've complained about the lack of it yet.
Okay.
Because we know the game a little bit better north of the border, I think we can see the nuance there.
Yeah,
but I don't think they do.
Lastly, in the column, Kelly writes, hockey in Canada is never going away. There's too much infrastructure built up around it, but it can stop mattering. That warning signal is flashing now. If you can't get Canadians up for a series featuring the greatest player in the world who is Canadian and plays in Canada, then I don't know what to suggest.
I think society has just changed. I think how we consume hockey has changed greatly. We can see every single one of our team's games now.
Mm-hmm.
So why? You don't go searching for other games.
I would argue a couple of things. Number one, I believe there was a time when interest in hockey cannibalized interest in all other sports in this country.
That's right.
Now, the internet and narrowcasting and niche markets, I think, have now chipped away from the interest in hockey a little bit. I also think events like the Toronto Raptors, who were drawing like 8 and 9 million people for their games during their NBA Finals run, have opened up new avenues for sports enthusiasts, that they're not as routinely funneled towards hockey as they were in previous generations.
Right. So there's actually been a really sharp inroad in a narrow view, in that you can drill down on your team in hockey far easier than you've ever been. And on the other end of the spectrum, the broad access to all sports now
It's just beige.
has created so much competition for the middle ground now that you don't have much middle ground. That neutral ice hockey game that you might be watching otherwise.
Yep.
That's got serious competition now, because like the other day, BB Andreescu was in a final, a WTA final. You couldn't watch it on TV. There's so much competition from other live events with Euro and
I looked for it on my TSN dial. I was like, oh, this is great. I can watch the Euro, the US Open, and BB. And then I was like, wait a second, BB's not on.
He's only on TSN Plus.
Yeah.
So there's just so much competition for the other stuff that I think the neutral NHL game falls.
I think the other stuff has burrowed into our sphere, wherever that sphere is, and I agree that you're so focused on your team now, because there's so much more information available now on your team, that you have drilled down on that to the expense of league at large.
Right. And now league at large stuff is in competition with Euro, with Premier League, with Bob, all
and
that
Blake,
stuff.
That's where the NHL is losing that competition, because it's beige and boring personality after beige and boring personality. It's a commissioner and head office that doesn't want you even looking at cap friendly, doesn't think that's constructive. No, but you know what I mean? Like the NHL and its marketing efforts and views and philosophies, I don't believe are keeping pace with young people and what they want. Like there's a drama every week in the NBA.
Well, and
this guy said that about this guy. This guy, got into a fight with this guy. This guy wants to be traded here. Like there are soap opera storylines galore, and the NFL is going down that road as well.
And that's one of the concerns here with this particular Stanley Cup Final. If you could orchestrate it better with a U.S. team and a Canadian team, I don't know, you could do better than the best player on the planet versus maybe one of the top 5 personalities in the league in Matthew Tkachuk. Like, this is a pretty good stab at it. Now, you'd rather Matthew Tkachuk played for the New York Rangers, I suppose, just in terms of getting a more hockey-centric market into it. I guess that's the only quibble you could have. But Matthew Tkachuk is the guy you want selling the game south of the border. And the best player on the planet being in the Stanley Cup Final should be a huge boon as well.
It should be. And the game tonight will do a very good rating. And of course, ratings aren't what they used to be because it doesn't account for
So
cord cutting.
fragmented. Yes.
Yeah, exactly, and all of that. I just I would have thought you would have captured more of Canada's attention with the McDavid factor here. It's not the Canadian team thing. That's nonsense. There's no Canada team. Very, very few people adopt the last Canadian team standing. But this is the best player in the game. This is potentially the best player from since Gretzky. And I guess part of the trouble on top of all the reasons we discussed, the first 3 games went to Florida. Right.
Well, and
the first 3 games go to Florida, and so now there's an inevitability to it, and it probably means it's less of a destination for you.
If Matt, if, and I know you're not, most of you out there are not hoping for this, but in terms of just like measuring how much interest is in the Stanley Cup Final, and even you who are not cheering for the Oilers, you would hate watch Game 6 like nobody's business if the Oilers got it there. So if the Oilers can pull this one off, can you imagine the number for game number 6?
Well, we're going to get to one question here that's in the chat box on YouTube. Nux for Cup asks, does a $65 million deal fit Guentzel but push Besser out next year? Yeah, that's the other thing. You know, Brock said the final year, $6 million. If you're going Guentzel at $9 million, then are you really just keeping the scoring wingers together for the 1 year? And next year, you're going to have to go about and find a replacement for Brock Besser at that salary point or less, because he's in the position to command 7, 8 million, 9 million, whatever the case is going to be. And so you've really just held serve over a 2-year period. It's a good shout. It's an interesting one.
They're going to gamble that they get a $4.5 million bump again, though, in the salary cap.
Right.
And they'll devote 3/4 of that to Brock Besser.
They're also going to hope that Nils Höglander and Jonathan Lekkerimäki can fill some of the missing goals if that's the case. I don't want to put a limit on Höglander. I put it this way. I would be surprised if Nils Höglander is a 30-plus goal guy per year, but I don't want to put a limit on him, and he scored 24 this year, and a lot of that came in bottom 6 duty without a lot of power play, so there is an avenue there to more goals out of Höglander. And, you know, the more I unpack it, Blake, Lekkerimäki is such a pivot piece.
Oh, a lot riding on it.
Yeah. So much riding on Lekkerimäki. We used to make this argument with Wielander, and to a degree that still holds, because Wielander has to come in and eventually be your second pair right side guy. Let's say you re-sign Roenick to the long-term deal, which I think is still the most likely scenario here.
Mm-hmm.
Wielander has to come in and be your second pair right side guy. Number one, because you need to fill that role, but you're so much better off if you can fill that role on an entry-level contract and not have to pay that position.
And,
right?
And it's one thing,
Myers is graduating out of that.
And it's one thing for the Canucks to have hit on their super high-end picks like Pettersson and Hughes, but they've maybe missed on Podkolzin already. They can't afford for another top-end first-round pick. Now, he's not top 10 pick.
No, but he's a top 15.
But he's a top 15. And guys, again, we keep on bringing up the Dallas guys. Like Wyatt Johnson's a 23rd overall pick. Like
Robertson's a second rounder.
You need one of those stories to really pan out where that guy becomes a significant contributor for you.
Yeah, well, and you know, honestly, and I understand what the draft guys are getting at when they talk about the high end guys, and that's when you find your difference makers and all of that. You know, it's very fair, statistically speaking, over the long course of time, but it doesn't mean that you can't find difference makers later in the first round or later in the draft. And Dallas is prime example. Like Hintz is the second rounder. Robertson's the second rounder. Johnson, 23rd overall. Where was Harley taken? 18th overall. So yeah, they got Heiskanen. He's fantastic. Ottinger, 26th overall. So yeah, they have an extreme
Stankoven.
Yeah, Stankoven. So, you know, yeah, they've got an extremely high pick there in Heiskanen, but like even their first rounders that haven't worked out, Faxa and Delandre, like they play a role for the team. You know, like the Canucks are at the point where like Levy played no role. Yeah. Virtanen played no role. McCann you gave up on way too early. So no, you're quite right, Blake. You can find players beyond the upper echelons of the first round. And the problem for the Canucks is they need to find players everywhere in the draft because of how few picks they have this year and going forward, and how few picks they've had coming into
it honestly, it puts pressure on guys like Kirill Kudryavtsev, who's showing some level of promise as a 7th round pick that you're like, please.
Well, and I think that's why we get excited about these, stock ups situation with prospects, because you're like, oh, if this guy could be a player.
And honestly, Pettersson, the EPD, like there's, if you get a player there, you're playing with some house money, and they haven't had a lot of house money.
No. Games.dailyfaceoff.com. You can play the nightly parlay challenge where you sign up. It takes a minute. You get thrown a bunch of prop bets for that night's game. Nightly winners win gift cards. Round winners win cash. Blake's been playing for us what we got today.
There's no cheering in the press box. I'm just going with, history, empirical evidence.
Mm-hmm.
Going Florida Panthers love all the way up and down. Florida to win. Under 5.5 goals. I think Florida will see what they did there in game number 4 and lock shit down. First goal, Florida. High scoring period. Second period, Barkov total assists on the over. That's just 1. Zach Hyman goals on the under. McDavid points on the under. That's allowing him 1. It's a 1.5 over under. Reinhart with the over on goals. Just need 1 out of him.
Let's get to today's menu. It's a presentation of Greta. Greta, a great spot to catch the game throughout the season. Quick walk to the Rinker Stadium. Go-to spot for food, drinks, fun before or after the game. Make it a game night at Greta, 50 West Cordova, or at gretabar.com. John Shannon's going to join us, talk a lot about hockey on TV. Of course, that's John's wheelhouse, including this upcoming Amazon deal for the NHL, as well as building off the conversation we just had about hockey in Canada these days in the Stanley Cup Final and what it matters or doesn't matter to Canadians. So that's coming up. We need to get to our Bet365 bets of the day, Blake. This segment, a presentation of Bet365, proud partner of Sekeres Price. I looked at the basketball game last night. It's funny because you've drawn the parallel here already today between the NBA Finals and the Stanley Cup Final. And much like the clinching game in the NBA last night, Florida back at home, up 3-1. Time to put an opponent away and do so early. I think the Panthers come out flying tonight with an opportunity to win the cup on home ice. Florida minus 0.5 goals in the first 10 minutes pays at plus 270. So if the Panthers have a 1-0 lead, a 2-1 lead after 10 minutes, turns your $100 into 270. That's where I'm going.
I'm looking ahead to the big match on Thursday, the opener for Canada at the Copa America. Jonathan David has not been great for Canada lately. He is due to score a goal. If Canada gets on the board, Canada's most likely goal scorer still should be Jonathan David, and you get him at plus 550 as an anytime goal scorer.
It's not bad.
I'm not predicting a win. I don't have to predict a win here.
Where's he? Did I hear another rumor about David and where he's off to?
Yeah.
He's forever seemingly surrounded by rumors.
Yeah, he'll be off to a big club somewhere.
Open an account with Bet365 today. Bet on a huge range of markets. So whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Use code VANBONUS when opening that account. John Shannon is next. Northlands Golf Course. Download the free app and book tee times with a touch of your thumb. And while you're on course, open the app for hole-by-hole GPS and track your score. 6 to 90-day reservations. Jump the queue. Lock in your date for $10 per player booking fee. Limited daily availability. Check it all out. GolfNorthlands.com.
In a season like this, you never want to miss a single second of what's happening on the ice, and you want to be around your fellow fans, right? Well, Greta Bar YVR at 50 West Cordova, the perfect spot to do so. Hey, if you've got tickets, a great place to pre and post. They've got drink specials every single day. And if you don't have tickets, well, stick around and soak up the atmosphere with all your fellow fans, play all the great video games and air hockey, great air hockey set up as well at Greta Bar YVR. We'll see you there, 50 West Cordova. The Vancouver Canadians are back at the net. Catch fireworks, giveaways, and Friday nooners all spring and summer long. Get your tickets at CanadiansBaseball.com.
Guest, a presentation of the Arnold Palmer designed Whistler Golf Club, now playing in summer condition and to rave reviews. We played there last week. Absolutely immaculate condition. Check it out with the extended daylight in June. Take advantage of those afternoon twilight rates and the amazing evening sunsets in Whistler. That golf course shows very well at any time. But can you imagine? Evening sunset, Whistler, mountain in the background.
Beautiful.
To book your twilight time or anytime during the 2024 season, visit whistlergolf.com.
We went 3 for 3 on the 16th tee, by the way. Sort of.
Yeah, the signature hole. No,
yeah. Al was in a little trouble, but I think he played it.
It's the one time Al was in trouble.
Yeah, exactly.
The one time I wasn't in trouble. Here he is, the former executive producer of Hockey Night in Canada, the co-host of the Bob McCown podcast, the one and only John Shannon. How are you?
I'm great, boys. How are you?
Fantastic. What do you think? Oilers coming all the way back, John. Are we going to have a classic Stanley Cup final, one for the ages, one we will never forget?
Well, if they do come back, even to some semblance of a Game 7, we will certainly never forget it. But it is going to be difficult to get 2 games in a row where the Florida Panthers play the same way. Now, that said, after it was 4-1, we might as well have just gone to minor hockey and running time, because it didn't matter. I mean, when Paul Maurice pulled Sergei Bobrovsky, the game was over, and what everybody was hoping to do in Florida on that bench was to stay healthy, and on the Oiler bench, they were just having so much fun. It was about time that they had some fun.
We've seen this in the NBA too. Leads getting away. It's not been banner drama this spring for either of these leagues in terms of television production, has it? I mean, it's let's hope that there is a little bit of drama left in the Stanley Cup final, because we haven't had a ton of it.
Yeah, although I would argue that the hockey has been a little more compelling than most of the basketball.
Sure,
I love the NBA, and I have been on the Doncic bandwagon all season long. He's been so much fun to watch. But that said, you're right. The game was exciting on Saturday for Oiler fans, for the people in the building, and the building itself actually became the much more compelling story and the crowd than the game itself when if you were sitting at home, that's for sure.
Well, fans here were lucky because they had a BC Lions game to tune into as an alternative. Had a Whitecaps
game. Our cup runneth over here on Saturday. There were
we had the same right over our shoulder here. And then we were watching the end of the golf as well on.
Yes,
right.
Yeah.
So it was a crazy weekend for that, and it's with Euro and Copa starting, it's going to get even crazier.
Hey, crazy as it was, I saw the documentary was on TSN last night. 30 years ago yesterday was the craziest day in all of sport. Remember? Bronco Chase, parade for the Rangers, U.S. Open, Arnold Palmer, World Cup kickoff in Chicago, and NBA Finals game, Knicks, Rockets, all in the same. 30 years ago yesterday was quite a day. John, we talked about this in our opening block. I'm not sure if you saw Cahal Kelly's column in the Globe and Mail this past weekend off the Stanley Cup final. He cites a Leger poll where a majority of Canadians say they're not paying much or any attention to the Stanley Cup final. And he goes on to say, I'll quote from it, hockey in Canada is never going away. There's too much infrastructure built up around it, but it can stop mattering. That warning signal is flashing now. If you can't get Canadians up for a series featuring the greatest player in the world, who is Canadian, plays in Canada, then I don't know what to suggest. The piece talks about how we're really just tribal fans now, whether that's Canucks, Flames, Oilers, what have you, and not necessarily grander fans of the game and the institution like we were back when you were running hockey.
We see in the comments when we start talking Stanley Cup final, there's the odd person who's like, come on, more Canucks talk.
Yeah. What says you? Well, what do you think about all that?
Well, one of the reasons that there was more discussion about complete NHL in the 90s was that for the most part, the Canadian teams weren't that prolific. Certainly when you think about the Maple Leafs and Canucks in the early 90s, but we went on in the second half of that decade, we went on a bit of a slump in Canada. The other thing is the word tribal is really important in all of this. This is what professional sports in North America has built itself on. When the moment you have expansion, the moment you have 7 or 8, we actually had 8 teams in our country at one point. And you can't expect a fan of Montreal or a fan of Toronto to watch Winnipeg or Calgary or Edmonton. Those days are gone, and they're gone for a lot of reasons, but mostly because you don't watch those other teams during the regular season. You don't have an interest in those teams during the regular season. You only care about your own team. And the other aspect of it, and I'm not sure Cahal wrote about this, is we used to have 80% of the players in our country were National Hockey Leaguers. Well, we're not at 50% anymore. This has become an international game. There are players from 12 or 13 countries playing in the National Hockey League now. So when you used to watch the Boston Bruins in the early 70s, you could talk about Phil Esposito from Sault Ste. Marie, and you could talk about Bobby Orr from Parry Sound, or you could talk about in the Flyers, the boys, the Watson brothers from Smithers. It's a totally different animal now, and is it sad? Well, it's not sad. It's a reality of how business is done. At that same time, those 7 teams in Canada are still great drivers of revenue in the National Hockey League. It's just they're not drivers as a unit. They're drivers as individual business opportunities, but they're still very important to the success of the NHL. And by the way, there'll be 4 million Canadians watch tonight.
Oh, yeah. They'll still get good ratings.
There'll be 4 million Canadians watch tonight. And last I checked, that will be by far the largest audience probably since the Super Bowl or the World Junior Hockey Championship.
Right. Super Bowl, World Juniors, especially if Canada, well, only if Canada's in a gold medal or semi, and Grey Cup tend to, be the bar for television ratings.
I mean, we're only 15 years into every game for every team being on your television, right? I mean, before, when you only had, maybe even when you only had 30, 40, 50 games on, a lot of nights of the week you watched other teams because that's what was on. Your team wasn't on, but now you get your fill. There's only so many nights a week where you can carve out 3 hours to watch sports on TV. So I think people just say, I'm just watching Canucks. I'm not going to watch the rest of the league.
I think that's fair. You do almost have to wonder, and this is a discussion that I do think that has occurred. Is there too much sports? Are there too much sports? That's a tough one grammatically. But are there too many hockey games on television? When it was national games Wednesday, national games Saturday, you got to cherry pick then you watched the Canucks, so you watched 3 nights a week, maybe 4 nights a week. Now you can watch 7 nights a week, and you can watch double headers every night. So it's you do have to wonder, and whether this is ad agencies asking this question, or the networks asking this question, or the league asking this question, are we close to oversaturation? Are we? Now, what is happening is the viewer is deciding what he wants to watch and when. And in the end, that is probably the best thing anyway, that the viewer gets to decide, not some guy in an ivory tower in Toronto deciding you get to watch Winnipeg versus Calgary on a Tuesday night.
Well, I want to go back to those days in a second, but first help me out, Shannon. When did we go to the Saturday night doubleheader each and every Saturday on Hockey Night?
1995. Yeah, that was
because
was our we came out of the work stoppage. If you work at the league, it's a work stoppage. If you're outside, it's a lockout. So we came out of the lockout in 94,
Mhm.
in January of 95, and we started the doubleheader that time.
You know, it's funny, John, because you mentioned the proliferation of games. When I was a kid growing up in Calgary, it was special to see the Montreal Canadiens on TV. When my family moved to Ottawa, it was special to see Wayne Gretzky and the Edmonton Oilers on television. I would seek those games out, or I would take advantage of when they were on. Even in the early 90s, like or in the early aughts, my roommate and I, we splurged for center ice because we wanted to watch, in part, the West Coast Express here in Vancouver and some of the quality teams on the West Coast. More games, and as you say, the proliferation and saturation that you can pretty much watch every team every night, with a few exceptions, I think has taken away some of that, events or special feeling.
So you're right. No, you're right. And I think then what has to happen, and listen, we've seen this in Major League Baseball. Major League Baseball has, when you look at 30 teams and 162 games, that's a lot of baseball, man. When you see it in the NBA, really the only sport in North America, and I'm not knocking soccer, please, so don't bitch at me. The NFL is the only one that's special because it's not played on every day of the week, but they're getting close to that, and they're going to hurt themselves by doing that.
Yeah.
They have created something special because there's a 1 day a week scenario, but we're getting to Thursdays and Fridays and Saturdays and Sundays in the NFL, and they're going to hurt themselves too if they spread it out a bit too much at this point.
Yeah.
And then that's the other challenge, Matt, is if there is so much, then it's incumbent on those in charge of television and the leagues to create entertainment. That's why what we watch on TNT with Barkley and Johnson and Shaq and Kenny is so important.
It's a TV show outside of the action. You're right.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Well, listen, just to talk about how this worked at Hockey Night, even when I was just a $10 a game guy, the guy who really modernized the show was Ralph Mellenby, and we would sit hours on end in the office and discuss, well, the Canucks aren't very good. Now, this is when I had 3 teams. The Canucks aren't very good. Montreal's great all the time, and the Leafs aren't very good. And our research is showing is that people are turning the games off and not coming back. So we got to the point where we could not rely on the game itself to drive viewership. So that's when Ralph says, well, we got to make the intermissions better. We got to be more, prone to be entertaining in the intermissions. And so that's how Don Cherry got started, was to be more entertaining. And then when I came, it was, Don was a mainstay in the first intermission, and we had nothing in the second. And so we needed to try to create. And then to Matt's point about the doubleheader, we went from having 2 intermissions to 4.
Right.
So it wasn't very. So the challenge was, the game is the game, but then you need to create an hour's worth of entertainment every week on television, and try to serve so many masters. And when I say so many masters, I'm talking about the viewers and fans of 7 or 8 Canadian hockey clubs.
Yep.
It was hard sometimes.
The other thing saturating hockey fans' minds is these darn podcasters that are programming all day long, talking about transactions and rumors, and it just takes up so much damn time that
we have nothing against podcasters. We love podcasters.
Let me just say before we move on from intermissions, I wish the regional broadcasts would put the same effort into the intermissions that you and Ralph Mellenby and others did at Hockey Night.
Money.
Back in the day. Those are the things that are clearly.
Not necessarily, Blake. Not necessarily.
It's not about money?
No.
Well, the big personalities cost money, right? You're not going to get BX to doing regionals.
I can't speak for what Rogers is doing. They've worked hard at it. They have they've tried a few things. They have spent lots of money on studio stuff and intermission and technology. They deserve some credit for that.
Well, yeah, but that's what I mean.
But
Shannon, they bring you in to Edmonton, right? Like you go in Edmonton to do intermissions. That's investment in the intermission product, and I applaud them for that.
Yeah.
You know, that's the sort of thing I'd like to see more of across the board. Before we move on from hockey on television, because I think he wants to talk about Cap Friendly.
Who, me?
No, Price.
No.
No.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Well, you can just listen to our show. We had Ted Leonsis on today.
Oh, and what did Ted say about Cap Friendly?
He loved the technology. He felt it would help them, so he bought it.
Wow.
What technology specifically? You mean he liked the interface, or is there something deep dark?
I think that without getting into the specifics, I think what he was saying was that they have a plan in their system that works very well. And they drag one person over from Cap Friendly to manage it. But it basically is the software that Cap Friendly has created.
Since last we talked with you, Amazon has been announced that we're doing national Monday night games on Amazon.
Yeah.
And then a spin around the league show on Thursdays, John. Edify us on that. Why this around the league show on Thursdays where they'll be dropping in and out of games?
So here's what I think. I don't know. This is a 2-year experiment in a petri dish, Canada being the petri dish, for Amazon to decide whether they want to be involved in hockey long term in the United States as well. Because in 2 years, there will be negotiations starting to open up for a bigger property in the U.S. And I think it's logical to suggest that the streaming system will be involved in the next race deal in the U.S. as well. So if you can master and create really good content, you hire people that can execute the plan in the short term. Basically, I've 50, 55 games on Mondays over 2 years, and then 55 Thursdays over 2 years. When you decide you're going into the market of 350 million or 350 million people in the United States, you have a proven product that you can work with, and you can press a button and execute the plan. That's why I think it's happening.
What do you make of what's happening in Columbus with Don Waddell, Pascal Vincent? You know, is that a franchise that can resurrect itself? It just seems like it's in tatters. I was just amazed. Johnny Gaudreau, his 4th head coach in Columbus alone.
I'm not surprised. I kind of assumed. Again, not to do another blatant plug. When we had Don on a couple of days after he got the job, and I asked him the future of Pascal Vincent, he said, "Well, he's our coach for now." So this was a done deal. He was not coming back. Don needed to get a few weeks under his belt, go to the combine in Buffalo and get a feel. But I assume he has somebody in mind who he wants to coach this team. And you're right, it's disappointing. They've had lots of bad things go wrong in Columbus. And maybe the worst of it is I've never seen a team with more injuries in the last 3 years than the Columbus Blue Jackets. They're over 1,000 games over the last 3 years, Blake. It's crazy how many injuries they have.
What are you hearing on Laine? Do you think teams believe a new leaf has turned over here and they think you can get the best out of Laine, or are there still teams you think that are quite uncomfortable with the notion of acquiring him, especially at that salary?
Well, I think you've answered the question, really, Matty. I think if Columbus will allow it, I think you probably have to have time to sit down with Patrik and ask him where's his headspace. Mm-hmm. We know he is a gifted hockey player. There was a point, I believe, in his time just before he got traded from Winnipeg to Columbus, where he had the best shot in hockey, better than anybody. And I don't know what happened. It would be incorrect to even surmise what happened, but you have to make sure he's mentally and physically 100% before you'd even contemplate trying, particularly in a cap era, trying to get any deal done. And then the question is can Columbus really, can Don ask a lot for him? When you consider if, in fact, he is damaged goods and he has a huge contract, what do you want to do? Do you want to give him away, or do you want to give him a fresh start somewhere, but you need assets in return? And
does that seem like the kind of risk that Jim and Patrik would take on? Is that not their style to take on that kind of risk?
I think that there are teams out there that would look at it and make decisions on it. But based on, I mean, beyond being in the assistance program, Patrik was never healthy and physically healthy in Columbus. He was always out. There was always an injury. He's one of those guys that has the wear and tear of the NHL life has really not been beneficial for him.
On the Canucks, all but certain that Lindholm is gone, and it's not necessarily term and money. It's just, play top two center somewhere else, play third line center here. Zadorov, big weekend, last best offer was reported. Nothing yet. We'll see. Our poll question today: if Lindholm and Zadorov, the two Calgary guys, if they leave via free agency, were the trades this year for them worth it, John? What says you?
I can see why people would vote no, but I think that in addition to getting the team to the top of the Pacific Division, I think it was the right message for the fan base. I think it was the right customer service decision to say we are going all for it. We want to improve every day. No one can sit there and complain that this group with Rutherford and Alvin and Rick Tocchet don't care about us. They care. They showed they cared. They tried their best. They lost to a better team in the end in the second round. I know people in Vancouver don't want to hear that, but they did. And they have a great foundation to work from. And I think the fan base should only be positive of what's going on. And they're going to have some money to spend. These guys don't come back. They're going to spend it. They're going to find people. And I don't know about you, but I think if I'm a Canuck fan, if Patrik Laine says, I'm going to try to sign this guy, I'm going to try to sign that guy, I now trust him. I believe in him for what he can do for this franchise because of what they've done in the last 3 years for this.
Who's the assuming Edmonton is going to be very competitive next year again, assuming they are a semblance of the selves that we see right now. Mm-hmm. Are the Vancouver Canucks going to be the second best Canadian team or challenging Edmonton at the very least? Do you think they've got the wherewithal to put this all together? They've got the cap space. Do you expect they're able to, and I'll say run it back, and I mean just points wise rather than necessarily with the same personnel?
Well, I think you have to. I mean, this goes to the discussion of who has a better core at this point. Like, when you're looking at, changes being made, and I think you have to be in a position with the Canucks to think, well, gosh, we still have Quinn Hughes, we still have Thatcher Demko, we still have Elias Pettersson. Hopefully that darn knee is okay. We still have, we have a few guys that can contribute. I don't have any qualms about what the Canucks will be, and you're right. The two best teams in Canada will probably be in the Pacific Division fighting for first place.
And we'll see if they devise a team that's can get over the Edmonton hump next year in the postseason. Mm-hmm. If that's the case, certainly did well in the regular season. Different matter when the chips were down in round 2. Great stuff, John. Thank you for this. Enjoy what's left of the final. And next week, we'll be talking off-season, draft, awards show, and all that good fun. Thank you.
Award show. Haven't they done the awards?
Well, we've got a candidate there. We got a pretty big
that's right.
candidate there
That's right.
in Quinn Hughes
He'll win.
for the non-announced category
He'll win.
at the award show. Hey, everybody, if you're enjoying what you're seeing here, then follow along with Sekeres Price on YouTube. I promise more content coming.
The kids call it subscribe on YouTube.
Well, how about liking it?
Do that as well. Smash it right now.